kind of focus is the purpose of the legislation. I wanted to kind of dial in on that one. That was something that came up a couple times in the edits that I received on my original paper. There is obviously a deep importance. This precinct-specific reporting of absentee ballots is very much related to post-election analysis for elected officials and for political actors in the state. But at the same time, it's also important to recognize that there's another element to this. The reason why this was put forward was to provide a certain level of transparency to the electoral process, and some people obviously disagreed with that categorization or that kind of explanation for the purpose. But that is still something that's going to be, maintained and stay consistent within our the policy paper that goes to the General Assembly. Because at the end of the day, reporting by precinct will ideally provide people that have some kind of anxiety or concerns about the administration of elections, would ideally provide them with a little bit more insight and perspective on kind of where votes are actually going and where they're being allocated, instead of just having a large number of absentee ballots dumped into a count. Also, we're keeping this to election night reporting. While it's obvious that we're not going to be able to report on all absentee ballots by precinct on election night, given the fact that ballots are going to be coming in via the mail, and logistically this is going to be a hard transition. It's something that we'd like to keep in mind. That's the focus of legislation, and precinct-specific reporting, absentee reporting, would ideally be with the goal of reporting a large share of absentee ballots by precinct on election night. Okay, so I did a little bit. This is something that came up and through several comments and edits. It was a little bit of a look into how other states report absentee ballots. About 30 states, or 32 states throughout the United States report absentee ballots by precinct. I say about because there is some variation, especially with military ballots and how those are reported. But for the most part, the majority of states in the United States report absentee ballots by precinct. So this is something that, if Virginia were to adopt this, they would be coming in line with a large number of other states. Then, as well as that, there is, I noticed through this policy, there seemed to be a certain adherence to maintaining some level of flexibility for different localities, and a cognizance of the different capabilities that localities have with respect to the financing and kind of funding of this, of this process. So that's something that was pretty important to many of you during the last meeting that we had, was where this money is going to come from. This is obviously going to be a costly transition, and it's important to be aware of that. This is something, and I was actually looking at Oregon this morning, but there is a option to there are options for how to go about counting absentee ballots, and one obviously is much cheaper than the other, and as a result of that, there's certainly a focus on it's the options being a counting committee or via just optical scan ballot scanners. So so this is obviously kind of illustrating a recognition of the kind of different logistical or actually the different capabilities that states have, or localities have in different states. So another thing that we were talking about was precinct-specific ballots. So this is something that was ultimately the kind of focal point of the last meeting. So precinct-specific ballots would be, there would be special coding on ballots that would then be, that ballot machines would then read and then tabulate and count ballots in accordance with, or absentee ballots in accordance with the precincts in which they were cast. So each precinct would need a particular and unique absentee or particular and unique ballot to the precinct. This is something I mentioned in the last presentation, but bears repeating because this is where we dial down on the costs that would be incurred by localities if we were to make this transition. This would be, so if you have, just to kind of illustrate it plainly, we were originally using, ordering ballots by ballot style. So that could be anywhere, that's a relatively small number, but for larger localities that can be a lot, especially if you have, I know obviously Fairfax County in particular has a lot of minority language ballots that it has to print off, and each ballot has to have English on it. So that creates a lot of ballot styles, but at the same time it's not going to be nearly as many as it would be for if we were to count ballots by precinct, because if we were to print ballots by precinct, and vendors charge by precinct or by ballot that or by unique ballot. So if I don't want to go directly into numbers here, because in my calls with vendors they were pretty I guess cagey about the actual details on what they. I think that's pretty fair. They want to talk to you guys about that, so and they wouldn't really be willing to get quoted on a number. But it's you have X price, and then that's multiplied by the number of precincts you have. So I guess it's up to you guys' haggling skills. I apologize, that was a bad joke. But then there's obviously, because of the fact that we're not printing as many ballots by, we're printing ballots by precinct, and the volume is not as large, you're going to have the individual cost per printed ballot could also go up. So if that's 10 cents for a ballot, with you go by the ballot style standard, that could then go up to maybe 20 cents a ballot. That's again just spitballing, but that was a number that I did hear. So I guess I can get that to you. So this is another option. This is something that we discussed last time, but the ballot on demand systems. This is essentially an alternative to ordering your ballots from a vendor. That ballot on demand system costs thousands of dollars. They are not very widespread in Virginia. I know Fairfax County has ballot on demand systems, and I've heard mixed reviews on them. I spoke to someone in elect who had worked in other states, and she spoke highly of the ballot on demand systems, but at the same time I've also heard people say that they are more practical, or they're a better idea in practice than they are in actuality. A big factor is that they are, you don't have the ballots, so you would be printing them out in a satellite early voting location, and that can be problematic because you could have technical issues with the printer. You could run out of ballot stock. You could run out of ink, or the power could shut off in the school. I mean, there's a number of factors that kind of have to be considered if the ballot on demand system is to be adopted. It does seem like a good option because it appears like it would be more cost effective on the from the long run standpoint. But at the same time, the issue being these systems they're very large as well, so there's this added logistical challenge. So without going too deeply into the weeds, I think it's something that needs further research if this policy were to be adopted, because ultimately it could be a good upfront investment, but at the same time there would then be the questions of where this money is going to come from and how they would be financed on the locality scale, or on a locality level. And then finally we have logistical challenges. This is something with mail-in ballots. I heard a couple of comments on just the amount of people that would probably be required to report absentee ballots by precinct. One kind of way of potentially resolving this would be to have a third-party service mail out ballots. This is something that's used in other states that have large vote by mail, or have many ballots that are cast by mail. They use third-party vendors to mail out the ballots. This would help because then you wouldn't have to have localities use their own staff and employ individuals to create the ballot packets that are then sent out to voters. We can hear questions about that in a second, because this is something that would be new to Virginia, but it's something that I heard from a couple people that I spoke to from other states, and seems like it could be potentially an option. But again, it goes back to cost. Then, even if we find the fund, if states, certain localities can fund this, obviously others can't. So the uniformity of the allocation of the kind of costs on this whole process would be something that needs to be considered. But at the same time, the logistical and kind of manpower that is required for the administration of this kind of process could outweigh the upfront expenses that would be that could be incurred from it. So again, something to consider. And then finally, reporting. So with reporting by precinct, we're going to see a lot more kind of entries on ballot tapes. So ballot tape would be, the ballot tape itself would be really long. We could see, entire rolls being used without reporting all precincts in the locality. This would require a software update for several localities in the state. As of right now, it appears that there are 43 localities in the state that have software that can upload data electronically without having to report the information through ballot tape. But in some smaller localities, as I said in the earlier meeting, could report by could still report by ballot tape, but mid-sized localities would probably need to report by through electronic, through an updated software system that could do this electronically. Primarily because this would just, you'd have large ballot tapes that would have to be read off, and the accuracy issue would be a problem that could result if we have, really, really long ballot tapes. So with that, I'd like to hear thoughts and recommendations and kind of takeaways from this update. From my talk with the commissioner, we think that this should be something that the General Assembly should consider. But at the same time, there is an incredible amount of costs that would be associated with this transition, and this is something that would be most likely felt by on the locality levels. So I open the floor up to questions and concerns. Allison.
Max, great job, by the way. Good job last time, wonderful job this time. Couple of questions just to drill down on some of what was not necessarily on the slides, but that you said. Are we definitively looking at this being election night reporting as opposed to what we've discussed about what can be some of the functionality where we could pull this data out post-election? Does it seem to be what you can tell us that there is some desire to make it election night versus it making it available post-election?
So that was something that I spoke to the commissioner about because I saw that concern.
Yes.
And don't want to make that seem like I'm glossing over it, but he felt that we should keep it oriented towards election night, but I don't want it to misrepresent his words. He felt like this would, our focus should be on election night, and if the General Assembly, wants to shift that focus away from election night, then that's their prerogative. But I think the kind of like language and the scope that we're looking for would be at least shooting for election night, even though that might be a challenge.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Um,
Sorry.
Oh,
Allison,
Alice,
more questions.
Go ahead.
Continue.
Jim.
Okay,
I
Jim.
would address the same issue. I had a conversation with Senator Deeds about this after the session. He's the chair of P&E in the Senate, and I asked him about, is election night reporting really important?
Yeah.
And he said, no, they don't care when they get the data, but they just want to have the precinct data. They'd be perfectly happy to have it. Speaking not just for himself, but for his colleagues, at least on P&E, that they don't need it on election night. The customers for this data will not use it on election night. They'll use it in the weeks following the election and months following. And so and what really is motivating a lot of the members of the legislature, both houses, is they're keen to get as much election night reporting as they can. But election outcomes are what they're interested in. The precinct-specific data is very important for the next election, but not so much for the one that they're actually reporting. So I really, we can look at that, but I think that any solution we come up with that involves election night reporting will actually slow down the reporting of election night outcomes.
I completely agree with that. And I think it would also just dramatically increase the cost if we were trying to, if we don't have to report by on election night, we would need to transition. I mean, fewer localities would need to transition their software. They could still report by ballot tape. There's a lot of factors that would be greatly helped by that.
Sorry, just real quick, just to speak for the department for a second. So I think it would be a good idea. I agree with what you said, but I think it's probably productive for us to express all of our concerns about what would be good or what would be bad about if the legislature decided we had to get this done on election night, right? Let's discuss what that looks like, what we don't like about it, make sure the report contains all of that information. But I think it would be a missed opportunity for the people in this room not to also express if it has to be done on election night, what does that look like, what's the best way we can do it. And I think maybe that's a productive way to move forward.
So at least they know the costs.
Exactly, and I think expressing those things in the report, frankly, serves everyone's interest.
And if I can speak to what Danny's saying, because I think Danny's 100% correct. We've looked at this, and I know Jim and you guys, you have looked at this really in depth. I think we all have. The reality is that election night, if we need to report winners or the results as quickly as possible on election night, that is more easily achievable if we don't have to report by precinct on election night. So if the goal is to have results as quickly as possible, that is easier on election night if we're simply producing results and not drill down precinct specific results on election night because of some of the things Max talked about. Just the time it will take to produce the tapes that are broken down by precinct when you've got a lot of precincts in a locality. It takes time to produce those tapes, and those tapes are very big and may not be manageable in the way that we're accustomed to. So that is a concern, but like Danny said, if the will of the General Assembly is to have precinct level results on election night, then that's just what they want, and then that's what they'll get.
I have a cool question for you guys about the ballot tape issue. I mean, as somebody who hasn't read, reported an election or election results via ballot tape, do you have any idea of and this is like how many precincts would be untenable, or how that would be, become a logistical challenge? Because I understand the length of the physical tape and having to report the data, just on a phone would be challenging and could potentially cause errors. But I'm curious, given your capabilities and your understanding of this situation, how much of a problem that would be.
I think there are a couple of things to consider about people. People can want what they want, but if they want it on election night, they will not get results quickly. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is because you have the people voting in the precincts, and those results can get phoned into us within almost 10 minutes. And people call us and say, these are the results. And then we can go put them online and they show up. What you had happen in 2020, and you will in future elections where you have a huge turnout, it took us, we were discussing in the office the other day, about an hour, 30 minutes to an hour for the tape to spool up to produce the results. Why is that? Is it because it's a cruddy machine?
Yeah.
No, it's not because it's a cruddy machine. It's because we had 14 to 16,000 votes on it, and it had all those results that it was trying to boop, 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 whatever Dr. Theopolis they had to do to the thing and print out the results. So that took time. If that now has to be printed out by precinct, okay, that's over here. We're going to be getting precinct results. And this leads into the second part. It deals with transparency and fluctuations on election night. We will be getting the precinct results. Meanwhile, the absentee precinct is trying to wind up hand counting, tabulating thousands, if not tens of thousands of ballots. And then, on top of however long it took in 2020 to do this, it would now have to be separated out by precinct in addition to whatever time it took. So it's not speeding anything up. And that's regardless of how anyone feels about it. This is just time and space and how they work. And so it would take a longer time. And what that means too is not only will that take more time, but the fluctuations that people saw on election night, which you discussed in your report, like in person was one way and then cap was done and things changed. We would have the same thing, except it wouldn't be at the state or just the state and local level. Then we'd have it with the precincts. And I don't know that people would say, oh, now that makes total sense to me. I was baffled by it happening statewide or at locality level. Now I'm not confused at all because it happened in 2,400 precincts. So I don't think that's going to make that any clearer.
This is the first time I couldn't make the other meeting, so if I'm a little ignorant, I'm just trying to play catch up. So it sounds to me like what we're trying to do is present something to the AGs or the General Assembly so that they can figure out whether they want this nice to have or not. There's election night reporting and post-election night reporting. These are two separate critters when it comes to precinct reporting. So there was mention of an HTML application that can be utilized to instantaneously basically upload voter credit, or not voter credit, but voter turnout or the results, and then go into the next day, maybe during Canvas when we're waiting for that Friday at noon, to upload the precinct by precinct. But I think just for conversation, I think we need to get some bumpers set and guidelines on what the expectation is of general registrars and how we can help, because there's a lot of stuff flying around, but there's no rails here. So we need to set some rails down saying, okay, we're going to go down this track of election night reporting per precinct, and then we're going to do post-elections. Because if you go the post-elections way, there's many different methods in which you can gain that information by precinct, utilizing the precinct specific ballot print that can be read based on the equipment that you use, such as us. We use the Print-Elect ES&S 450 for our central absentee. This particular thing and that would be used for vote by mail. All of the vote by mail ballots go in there, and it can run a report by precinct of the results. It's quick, fast, and done, but it's done with electionware software. That same software can then facilitate the sticks that we take from our optical scanners. We would need two. One that gets sequestered in the courts, and then one is a backup. That backup stick could be put into, say, Wednesday, generate those reports, and boom, you got it done. The cost on that is minimal. Okay. The cost is ballots. But to my confusion, I need to understand what you want from us as far as information, details, rough order of magnitude, cost, things of that nature.
No, I mean, I should be honest, that was incredibly helpful. It just, the way all of you guys have been framing this, because I think, I obviously am relatively ignorant to what it looks like on the ground for all of you guys. And I think hearing that election night reporting is a substantial issue, a much more of an issue than I had originally expected, is very valuable information. So I guess thank you for saying that, and thank you for helping me to put some frameworks on that.
Just because of your question was about parameters before we move on. So I actually think this last slide is sort of useful. Again, keep in mind whatever product we come up with here is going to the General Assembly. It's still good for elect to know everything about the weeds, right? But we're not going to, I don't think we're going to be able to communicate that effectively to the General Assembly.
Understood, but you're talking about implementation.
No, I agree.
Getting into the weeds at this level, I know, is a little too much. You
No.
still want the 30,000 foot level.
I actually think that's really good. I was just going to say as a frame, I think what we are sort of hoping for as a general framework for what will go to the General Assembly is they're going to have to set some really broad rules, right? For example, maybe the broad rule they're going to set is the difference between whether this would have to be done on election night, which very obviously is not the vibe for the room, or whether it can be done after. But the more granular stuff, I think the hope is the General Assembly would defer to elect to create regulatory standards for that.
Understood.
And that's where we...
But the problem is you still have a price tag associated.
Yeah, absolutely.
And until we can understand what implementation looks like at a weed level on our
I
part
gotcha.
to give you that information.
Yeah, that's very
what
fair.
we need to get out there.
No, that
Y'all
makes
taking
sense.
turns?
Yeah, no, he has had his hand up a couple of times, but I do have something that I want to say, but you need to go first. Okay, so, I mean, just so that we are all on the same page and we can summarize, because, Max has done a wonderful job with the presentation, but here's what I think I understand. So, Max or Danny can correct me, because I don't want to walk out of here with the wrong understanding. So where we're at is we know that we have to produce ballots by precinct. So should the General Assembly want this, then we know we have to produce ballots by precinct. There's no alternative to doing it that way. We can either have the vendor print them in batches by precinct in an adequate amount, or if need be, for early voting, we would utilize a ballot on demand solution. And some of them, like Max has said, can be very costly and are very big pieces of machinery. They're not all that way. And some of us have had or are getting ready to have demos of these systems, and they are rather impressive. But so those are the two ways that you produce your ballots by precinct. The question, or perhaps the options are, you report by precinct on election night, and every time that you report results, whether it's election night or the Friday deadline, you report those by precinct. Or the alternative is you report the regular consolidated results of total votes for these candidates on election night, and then sometime, yet to be determined, we would have a requirement that we produce the results in a more granular, drilled down precinct level. How we accomplish that will depend on our vendors and what is available from them, which may be some sort of election software product. And that's kind of where we are. And if I understand what our goal is that this committee needs to have pros and cons to give the General Assembly about, if we do this option, the results may be slower to get to you, but you'll get that data sooner. Yet it'll be slower on election night, but you'll have it sometime on election night as opposed to 2 weeks later. Or we do it later and maybe it's more costly, yet it gives local officials more time to get the data together. So there's some pros and cons that we need to do. Is that what our goal is?
I agree 100%. And the only thing I will add is that this is an opportunity for all of you guys to speak, and ultimately elect has to make this product, which is either going to take the form of at least a report and possibly some recommendations on top of that based on the information you guys provide to us.
Who out of this group does the presentation to the General Assembly?
It'll be it's in the form of a report is what's prescribed, and that'll officially be through our office, through the commissioner. I don't have internet in here, so I can't pull up the date, but it's in October. I don't know what day, but October is when the report's due. I think it's closer to the end.
I was just curious if anybody here.
October 30th, yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
31st, yeah.
I was just curious if anybody that's here is going to be people who have experience with these different options will be presenting to the General Assembly, or whether we're just going to be taking their recommendations and someone else is going to present it.
The report is
secondhand.
going to be prepared by us, and it's going to be the department being us, taking into account all of the information here as well as other research.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions?
Can we,
Yeah.
I think I'm probably a step ahead of everybody. You talked about the software, and your thing that can translate the vote tallies into files, and by software we'll be introducing that. And we won't need tapes. I'm sitting here at the canvas looking at this USB and trying to, how do I compute this USB in my hand to these written reports from my precincts.
You would still need the tapes from the machine.
That's okay,
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's what I
Yeah.
didn't understand. And for us, yes, we laugh about it because we think this thing's going down the hole. We, you know, with when you start throwing like the last election, when we go to presidential elections, we're out in the boondocks and we got 14 towns, and you know what kind of write-ins we get in our little towns? You know how long that tape is? It's gonna be fun.
Well, and that's why it's so important that we're only focused on the early voting.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, they write in on early voting.
Oh, I know, but at least we can get more hands on deck
Yeah.
just than the paper mache.
Any other?
So I just two cost considerations that are, you were talking about sort of the uniformity and the equity of funding and process and so forth. So some people have that software already, some people don't. So there's a disconnect there in terms of what it's going to cost this locality or what it's going to cost that locality. And then even if you have a ballot on demand system as a GR, I wouldn't be comfortable having a ballot on demand system without some sort of backup. So you're still going to have the expense of printing you're not going to avoid printing ballots by having a ballot on demand system. You're still going to have, or programming for that number of ballots and so forth.
Or for using express vote, ADA.
The only thing I want to say, I don't know, I had to leave early last week because I had a family emergency. I don't know how many other people in the room are kind of missing something that we're all kind of assuming, and that is we've talked about ballot on demand and printing. And you might be thinking, well, why is that a big deal? We're hung up on printers. I don't even care if it's a printing. It's probably what it's going to be. The thing we're trying to get at is there needs to be an automated process. Printing is probably the form it will take, but it needs to be an automated process, because when you have 13 precincts, 200 some precincts, 15 precincts, and you have people coming in, you've got to make sure they get the right ballot.
You've got to increase the error.
And the ballot on demand system is how you help make sure. I mean, you could get a jukebox. You could put like 15 ballot styles, have a jukebox, they scan it, it plays some Elvis, and it gets them ballot style 1, and everyone's happy. But that would work too. But we're not going to have a ballot on demand jukebox. So that's why we're talking about a printing system, so that we get rid of that human error.
At this point, what I would like to see, Danny, Rachel, Max, is instead of some PowerPoints, some bullet points, so that the committee can now work on, okay, here are the things. You're either going to print your ballots by ballot style, like Walt's talking about with the printer, or you're going to buy ballot on demand, and give us the ability to say, okay, here's how that would work, and here's the pros and cons of doing it that way. Because I think we've got to that point now where we've all figured this out mentally. We know what it looks like. Now we've got to drill down into the weeds, like Terry was talking about, to get some pros and cons put together.
We're still going to need the vendors to be able to program them all precinct specific.
Right. And Max, you talked to Karen, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, to my understanding is, I mean, this is from speaking with Karen Hoyt Stewart and elect, and then also speaking with reps for Dominion, and I spoke to several, at least 4 different election vendors, but and they seem to be confident that their machines their systems would be able to tabulate the ballots by precinct if they had unique, like a barcode or some kind of. There's some do barcode.
Because that voter will be like,
sorry.
Don't say barcode.
I don't say barcode?
No.
Okay, sorry, I apologize. Thank you.
It's timing marks.
Oh, okay. Thank you. No, this is helpful.
Yeah.
Should we?
In the interest of time, just so we get through Max's presentation, we'll also have some time at the end to revisit some of these things. But Frank, I know you've had your hand up for a while, so we won't bypass you. But after Frank's question, we should move on to Javon, just so we're giving equal time, and then we'll revisit.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify if we're talking about the same processes for in-person early voting and mail absentee voting. For in-person voting, it seems that it would be either a different precinct, different ballot style for each precinct, different ballot code for each precinct, or a ballot on demand. If you're sending it by mail, though, and it's coming back in a return envelope that identifies the precinct in a return envelope, does that allow for, manual sorting of that, so the ballot has to be, it can be the same ballot, or does each of them have to be different?
It still needs to be.
Still needs to be an individual ballot.
Yeah, it's,
Okay.
Frank, it still needs to be the individual ballot style by precinct style, or precinct. Simply because when you cast those ballots in the cap, you're unmarrying them with their envelope to ensure that you are not, you're maintaining the secrecy of the ballot. So it's better if we just apply it across the board.
Okay,
Thank you.
Well, you could do it, but you have to have a separate machine
Yeah,
for
separate
each
machine.
precinct.
Fairfax County
Because
is
otherwise,
different.
once, like you said, once you've detached it, you're just kind of dumping them in all in the same
Well,
bucket.
but with the ES&S 450, you can pile on thousands of ballots, and that reporting is what separates it out.
Yeah.
But only if it's able to separate it out because it's a different ballot.
Right.
These are that would all be the same ballot.
Right.
Well, even then, it can still do it by precinct.
Yeah, you could do it the way Frank's talking about, but it would, instead of having results on election night, we'll get you results in 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's adding complexity instead of reducing complexity.
Right.
So let's just transition into Javon's presentation, and like I said, we can revisit. Once we get a chance to also spend some time on this topic.
Just send us questions.
I was gonna say, this seems like the right course of action. All right.
Thank you for all your feedback on this section. Take it away, Javon.
Great. First, I want to make sure everyone can hear me.
Yes.
Yes.
sir.
Great.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. First, I just want to apologize that I'm not with you all today. I really wish I could be, but the timing just didn't work out. But nevertheless, excited to give you all an update on what I heard from you all and things I've learned since we last talked. So today I'm going to go a little background just to catch anyone up to speed who may have missed the first meeting, talk about the new additions to our draft, and then go through the options with your feedback, and then hopefully have another robust worker discussion as you all just had. So again, just quickly, Virginia essentially waived the witness signature requirement during the last few elections because of the pandemic. They directed elect to convene this work group to talk about different ways to verify voter ID for absentee ballots. So from there, we put together an objective memo, just different options from around the country, and a combination of those options as well to see if we can find something that works for the Commonwealth. And we're here today to get some feedback from you all to see what you all think, since again, you all are the experts, you all are the ones working on the ground with this work, and whatever happens in the GA will ultimately affect you the most. So looking forward to hearing what your thoughts on these. So number one, I heard from several of you that we should add more about the absentee voting process to the report for readers who don't know about all the safeguards already in the process. So about, all the information the applicant must submit at the front end to get an absentee ballot, including their name and address and all that stuff. The list you all look over before you accept an absentee ballot, just kind of all the things that someone who's not working much else would know. Thought it would be important to add that so people have a background to know that no matter what we do with these options, there are still other safeguards in place to try to make sure we have having secure elections. Also, several of you said you wanted to have an option where we keep the status quo, retain the witness signature requirement. I think this is mostly because some folks felt that several of the options are more burdensome to voters and to you all than the witness signature option. So there should be an option to keep what Virginia has had for quite some time now. Now we go into the options with feedback from you all, just kind of summarizing what I heard from you throughout the last few weeks as you all reviewed our draft. So the first option, of course, was the voter signs an affidavit. This is the voter attesting that they are who they say they are and they're properly casting their ballot. This is the process that we've used over the last 3 elections, I believe, because of COVID. So what we heard is that this would be the easiest option to implement because I think it is already implemented now. Voters are accustomed to this approach because of the last few elections. I think if you remember, we talked about some kind of options within that option to So an option 1A, if you will, so requiring the last 4 digits of someone's social security number to the affidavit to make it stronger and to make sure the person is who they say they are. It's unlikely that some random person would know someone's last 4 digits of the social security number, and of course the GRs will have that on file when they get to applications to compare it to. So it could be another level of verification there, or strengthening the statement of voter. Currently it's kind of broad. It could be strengthened to have a more deterrent effect so that people know what happens if you are improperly voting or voting and you should not be voting on someone else's behalf. And those were both seen to be taken well. No one really voiced any concerns. I would like us to be part of the discussion later on to see if there are concerns around those options, or if folks like those two or one of those two, or a combination of them. And it's also be the smallest burden on voters and election officials to have that. And again, this has been a successful approach for the last few elections. We've heard no reports of any issues using the affidavit system. So folks felt like it's been working, and I think most people liked it from what we saw in the feedback. Moving on to option 2 here, so allowing voters to send in a ballot ID with ballot. So this was mirror, Virginia has a long list of accepted identifications. I believe it's around 15, and this option will allow someone to send a copy of that into the election office when they submit their absentee ballot. So it seems like people have several concerns around this option because, few people have printers. So that would either cause someone to have to go find a friend to print it out, or go to a Kinko's and pay for it. And of course, that's not free. Travel is hard for some folks. Printing costs could be expensive. And something that I didn't think about was the security concern. If a bad actor knew that there's going to be possibly passport numbers or driver license numbers or, bank account statements in absentee ballots, it could incentivize them to go out and try to take ballots. And, of course, that's going to be concerns on many different fronts. But that's something to think about with this option, too. They're going to be full of personal information that you would then have to balance inside the office. Do you retain those? Do you have to get to destroy them? A lot of things to think about there. So it's, again, part of the administrative burden. And, of course, having more folks in the cure process, too. And I didn't think about this either, but it could be an increased cost for postage, which ultimately will come back on the state or the county to handle. Option 3 was signature matching. So this is when election officials will use the signature on the ballot or the oath and compare it to a recorded signature from either registration, from the DMV, from both, just to make sure that the signatures look alike enough to accept. This one was, I appreciate everyone's candor in their how they felt about this option during reporting, but there were very concerns around protected ballots. The folks felt like this would be very complicated to transition to, so it would be a whole new process for the Commonwealth. I think people, were really worried about the level of training that would be needed to signature match here. It would increase voter anxiety. We hear stories from people saying that they didn't trust that they could get their signature to match what they signed when they registered to vote. So that would increase anxiety around voting, which we don't really want either. And this technology and software is used, there are costs associated with that. So I had a few conversations with election officials around the country. There are about 30 that use technology to signature match. So the process typically is that every ballot that comes in will go through the technology, the software, and only about 29 to 35, 40 are accepted based on the text. So that will leave the other 70% of the ballots for hand matching. And then, it continues in that process, which can take a long time. Talking to someone from Arapahoe County in Colorado, and Colorado, again, is one of the all-male voting states. So they get around 300,000 absentee ballots every time there's an election. 30% would be handled, the easy ones, by the technology to accept. Then the rest of those who are not rejected, but not verified by the technology would go to a bipartisan team of poll workers who will match them up. And then for those ballots that don't make it past the bipartisan team, They go to another team with more people, and if those are rejected, then those would be put into the cure process. So they said, out of 300,000, they have around 3,000 ballots in the cure process, which, proportionally doesn't sound like a lot, but, even 3,000, 1% or whatever that is still going to be a significant burden on GRs and people making phone calls and sending out emails and letters to ask people to come and fix their ballots. So it's something to keep in mind as well. And the technology, there are about 2 or 3 vendors that play in this space. It seems like a $20,000 startup cost, and then an ongoing fee of about $7,000 per year. And of course, it's going to vary between the size of the county, if there's any type of agreement with the state and those types of things too. But it seems like it would still be a significant cost associated with doing signature matching and using technology. Some places don't; they just do all of them by hand. But that's probably a very heavy burden for a place like Fairfax or one of our more populous counties to have to do that for hundreds of thousands of ballots. And now I want to kind of open it up to you all. If folks have strong opinions about certain.
I'm first. I'm sorry. I'm calling rank. I'm first.
Go ahead, Madam President.
I was going to say, I have to call you guys out. So, all right, Allison, you got it.
Javon, wonderful job. I noticed a lot of the comments we had last time made it into this updated presentation. Wonderful job. Hope it's nice in Boston. We miss you down here in Virginia. Just a couple of things real quick. In option 1 that you stated is basically stay the same, you added in what had been, several people had made the comment in the last group that one way to achieve this would be to update the affidavit statement or update the envelope B, which is what we call it internally. To update the envelope B to also now require additional information, which would be the last four of the Social Security number and the year of birth, which are 2 pieces of information that are required on the request for an absentee ballot. And so that would facilitate our ability to match the identity of the person in lieu of the witness. And I personally think that should be an option as an alternative and not that it's the stay the same method, because that is a different thing that we would be doing from what we're doing now. So I would just recommend that instead of that being hidden in option 1, that be an alternative option on its own. Otherwise, I think you've summarized the situation completely there.
Great, that's a great suggestion. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I can't see everyone, but I hope, I'm not sure if you can see me, but I appreciate everyone. I'm not being cold. I just can't see you all.
Oh, okay. We're smiling at you.
Yeah.
Waiting.
Terry.
Okay, it's Terry from Hanover County, just a little north of here, but, yeah, I think your number 1 option should definitely be the year of birth and the last 4, simply because, beefing up the witness statement and they're swearing to it, if anybody's going to be, a bad actor, they don't care, because they're going to try to commit it, but it's going to really narrow it down to that voter, because what's the likelihood of some bad guy knowing the last 4 and the year of birth? The ID situation, that's just crazy, because there's nothing to compare them to. And then I like the idea of the signature matching technology. I think it's important that you put it on as an option for the future for implementation, because, to your point, 1% of a gajillion ballots coming back, that's a lot, and we still have to hand touch each and every one of the ballots and their applications at the same time. And it's done over a period of time, because we have pre-processing, so this would be pre-processing, and we could get that validation. So I think this is easy.
Well,
I am a little bit. The one that gives me the most heartburn is the signature matching. Just to be perfectly candid with everyone who may not do this, the witness signature thing, I think the concept has been well, the witness signature means that that person is really there. But there's not like we have a database of everyone's signature in the universe who this could be, and some people's signatures are indistinguishable from modern art. And so we have no way of knowing, well, that's Art. I see him at Burger King, I can ask him, did he really sign it? So if you think that that is some kind of like indicator that this is for real, the person who signed the ballot could have just also witnessed it through the magic of penmanship. As far as the signature matching goes, the concern I have with that is, I was looking at the rules of evidence for Virginia today. From when I was in law school, I remember us going through how you qualify as an expert. And it's not like, oh, you took a class from the FBI on forensic handwriting, you're an expert now. That wouldn't pass muster. So if someone were to say, well, can you come to court and talk about why this ballot was rejected or not? I would be, well, I haven't published in the field. I'm not known as a wizard of forensic handwriting analysis. I can't testify to this. I'm not well respected in this field. No court would certify me as being qualified to give expert testimony. So we're going to have people who do something that's frankly less intense than a correspondence course on signature matching. And they're going to be the ones who decide to count a ballot because we know that's not fraud, or to not count it because we know that's not fraud. So I don't see, based on my other experience with what it takes to actually be qualified as an expert, it's like, do you have experts testing the ballots for handwriting? There's matching signatures. The answer would be no, because none of them would be qualified as an expert in a court.
But to that point, if the ballot was kicked out because it didn't match, and we can't reasonably, look at that and go, okay, because right now, we're just guessing right now as to whether that is the person. We're matching all the information that we have now. And so when they write Mickey Mouse on there instead of their name, we can call that one out. But we still have an opportunity to cure that ballot if there is some question or if there's a red flag flown on that particular ballot.
I can't cure 70% of my absentee ballots by mail. I mean, if you want to, we would maybe know the results from your county for the presidential election by now, but I could not do that. I mean, that's just not a show.
And I really hate to speak again, I'm so sorry, but I have a question for the attorney. So if we're gonna say there's 4 options, there's leave it the way it's been for the last 3 elections with no witness. Have an affidavit that also includes requiring you to provide your last 4 and maybe your birth. The 3rd option is then, what was the other option on this one?
ID.
Okay. The voter has to provide a copy of a valid ID of some type. And then the final option is this super magic signature verification technology that I believe, Danny, you confirmed in the last meeting of this work group that there is no plan to have that be part of the new Veris currently.
It is not.
So we're not even on the table. We're just pursuing. So down the line, full disclosure, there's 4 options maybe, right? Is it the idea of the Department of Elections that we are going to provide the General Assembly with 4 options and they can just choose? Or is elect going to make a recommendation? Here are the 4 options, here's the one we like.
I think on this one, I can't speak for the commissioner, it's ultimately his report. I think we are likely to make a recommendation.
Okay.
I don't think we're prepared to make one yet. I think part of this meeting is to make sure we know what the field thinks. But
So speak now or forever?
yeah, I don't anticipate. Yeah, and I think everyone should speak. And also, of course, like if things don't fit in the discussion, you can also email us.
Okay.
That information can make it in the report. I don't anticipate that we would be agnostic on this one because there are definitely much bigger costs and burdens with some of these options than others, and they're not necessarily more secure. But I'm also not an expert on all of those things, and some of you guys in this room are. So this is why we're having this conversation right now.
Just not a handwriting expert.
No, I don't know if we have any handwriting experts in the room, but you guys are the ones in the field who will ultimately be responsible for implementing a lot of this, which is why we want to gather all this information and have this discussion now. But to answer your question, I anticipate there will be a recommendation for this question between those 4 options, and I think we will, if nothing else, rank them to some degree. Like,
Okay.
this is what we would like. Obviously, we don't get to pick. We're not the General Assembly, but we will be making a recommendation, I believe.
Thank you.
Brenda, and then.
So I actually see 5 options, not 4. There's an option to have no witness signature, which would be different than what is in place right this minute. There would be the ID option. There would be the signature verification. There would be the witness signature as we have it now, and then also updating the affidavit for the voter. So I see 5.
The request of the General Assembly is to provide alternatives to the witness.
So
they're assuming the witness is gone. But I guess we can make a recommendation that we don't want the witness.
Yeah.
well, but when you on the slide where it says leave it as is, that was referencing leave it as is, no witness signature, and as is actually a witness signature. Because currently, outside of COVID, the witness signature is required, so that is the current.
Well, and does it have to change because of the new law affecting the no witness signature is required during a pandemic? So that would have to change.
But our state of emergency expired, so the witness is back unless we go into a state of emergency.
Correct.
I think that's a good point, and I think Javon, if I remember correctly, I think your memo organizationally does this, but it's a good note, and we'll just make sure those things are spelled out in the recommendation. The General Assembly should know that, when we're not in a state of emergency and when we are, but either way, we'll make sure that's organized and spelled out.
Should, but,
Alright, Frank.
Yeah, I was actually going to make the same point. There really are 5 options, and start with the current law, which is there is a witness signature unless there's a state of emergency. In terms of the options, I prefer the no witness, and I think adding additional language, including the social security number and/or the birth date, makes sense. I question about social security numbers. I think everybody has one, and I think in order to get an absentee ballot, you have to submit that information. So it shouldn't be too burdensome, but we might want to take a closer look at that, make sure that's the case. I think signature matching is a terrible idea for the reasons that have been discussed, and requiring a meal and ID doesn't even make any sense. But thanks, Javon. I think you outlined these really well in today's PowerPoint.
Javon, did you do a little research on the?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Frank, and thank you for your comments. Right in the end now. Yeah, there are currently 343 people and registered voters in the Commonwealth who do not have a social security number, which is a relatively small number, but we still would have to talk through how we would handle that should they want to vote absentee. So it's 343.
The IRS will gladly provide those people with a tax ID.
Yeah. I don't know, JD, if you can see hands here, but this is Greg Riddlemoser, currently, for today anyway, representing RPD. I want to add a wrinkle, and then basically agree with what Frank just said. We have over the years kind of poo-pooed the witness signature, and every general registrar has, because you can just scribble and that counts, right? So the maintaining of the witness signature, in my opinion, ought to actually become more rigorous in the sense that it ought to have a printed name and address associated with it, just like when you sign a petition, that you are required to provide additional information. So we can say that status quo is the code says there shall be a witness signature, but in putting a perfectly packaged presentation together for the commissioner, who will then pass it on, that ought to be status quo as is, and then there's status quo plus, so to speak, JD, of making the witness signature itself more robust. Now, I fully expect that the staff recommendation is not going to be to do that, so we ought to have something that's implementable by the registrars and is sufficiently rigorous so that the parties and the candidates believe that there's righteousness in our process. And so I think that is, as Frank just said, the last four and the year of birth. Then we can put in through the administrative rules how the registrar must actually deal with that. It wouldn't go in the code. It doesn't necessarily need to be part of Chris's recommendation to the General Assembly committees. But when we have those ballots come back, just like there are things that are material omissions, there ought to be material requirements, if you will, for the registrars on how to process these new affidavits that are, witness-free, so to speak. So we need to marry them up, and I don't need to solve the puzzle for you, but we need to marry up the returning ballot with the absentee request that sent it out in the first place as an administrative matter, right? So again, let's make the witness signature more robust, like petitions, or let's make the affidavit more robust and include some things that are voter discernible at the registrar's level, and then marry things up so that we have confidence in the system.
Jim, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, I agree with you in part on that one, because I think we're making too much of the witness requirement as an effective means to verify the identity of the voter who marked the ballot. I mean, there is no age, residency, citizenship, registration status, or legibility requirement on that. You can have anybody scribble anything on there, and I think more than occasionally, as Walt has suggested, it might be the left hand or the right-handed voter who signed the thing in the first place. So I think that what really protects us from fraudulent voting is not the witness signature, whether it's there or not. It's actually the system, which only mails one absentee ballot to one voter. And that can only go to the registration address of the voter. It can't go anywhere else. So the voter can lose it, the dog can eat it, it can be misdelivered and then a second one can be requested. But only one ballot will be accepted from each voter. Now somebody could attempt to fraudulently vote by fraudulently applying for an absentee ballot in the name of some registered voter. But that ballot's going to go to that voter's registration address. So the only way to get it would then be to risk, a term in Leavenworth by rifling through the mail in that box. So I think the system now, with or without the witness signature, actually is a pretty strong system. It's very difficult to actually vote in the name of somebody else by mail. And if you do it, you're going to get caught because, registrars, you try to enter a second ballot into Veris and it goes nuts, and I'm sure the new one will be even stronger than the old one. You can't do it. And so, maybe, I really think the system we have now is stronger than just the witness thing. That's really not an important component of it. And adding the last four to social is maybe a good idea. 343 people may have a problem, but that's very tiny. And the year of birth, people may forget their social, but they're not going to forget the year they're born. Well, some of us may eventually. But I mean, as a fact, and should those people be voting anyway? Yeah, that's another issue.
Jackie?
Absentee voting is because people are absent from their resident address.
No, not anymore. It's not absentee voting, it's early voting. We have two. We have early voting by mail and we have early voting in person. We don't have absentee voting.
But you can have your ballot sent somewhere besides your resident address.
Yes,
that's what Jackie said.
Good point,
You
yeah.
can have the ballot sent.
Annual ballots, I'm talking about individual elections.
Yes. To say this is another option that we beef up the witness signature. If we're making a recommendation, that would not be a recommendation that I would make, because that doesn't really get me anything. I still have someone I don't know who they are at an address that I can't verify, and then in those registrar directions, does it say I have to verify who that person is and that they live at that address, and how would I do that? Because it doesn't have to be a registered voter. They can be 5 years old. I just think we're asking for information there that doesn't have any verifiable impact for us, whereas the last four of social, and it also stays the burden on the voter to have that person with them in order to do that, which is what we ran into with COVID, is elderly people calling us up and saying, I don't have a witness, how do I do this? So I don't think it really solves the problem, and I'm more likely to say the last four and the date of birth is information directly from the voter, doesn't put an additional burden on the voter.
So I have a question that will hopefully round up a lot of the discussion. I hear that there's a lot of consensus among my colleagues here on this row, and between us and Greg and Frank here. Rachel, how would you best like us to tell you what we would prefer? Or do you want to send me a ranked choice ballot? I think a lot of us are agreeing. We like the whole idea of.
If you like the secrecy of the ballot, I am happy to send out a Google poll, but I mean, this is the purpose of us meeting together, so we can just say, I feel like we're sort of neat, you know, fine.
I actually somehow got sucked into this group. So when I heard that there was they're going to be working the witness signature, it's like, well, that's a hot potato I'm going to avoid. And then on a phone call, and it's like, well, thank you for volunteering for the witness signature thing, and I had a very big face because we were on the phone. But here I sit. So the General Assembly can do whatever they want. I mean, I think we're kind of just making recommendations. They can do whatever they want. We'll do it. The one thing that I did feel like was a hanging thread that, again, we've all kind of been talking about, and there are people in this room who might be like, what? There are 300 people who got registered without a social security number. It happens because sometimes, I don't know that it is so much the case anymore, but anecdotally, back when Social Security started, husbands and wives would have the same Social Security number. Sometimes they would be just one digit off or something like that. And then we have people who have been born overseas who are American citizens, who, for whatever reason, live a life of luxury, usually in Paris it seems, who don't have a social security number. And so they don't have one. And so when they send in their forms, this is not something that we just go into shutdown mode and just have to go to the ABC store. We're like, well, let's look in the manual or email the department, because this is not that unusual that we don't know, we've never dealt with this before. So there are circumstances that we are aware of where citizens do not have a social because of the reasons I've outlined, and there may be others. And so I think the code may still say when they come in to vote, we're supposed to ask them to give us a social. We don't have anyone in York County, I don't think, right now. We had one person a few years ago. And that might be something to check on the poll book software, that they have that so it can show up. Because I know a lot of them don't have the social security number anymore. They used to be printed. The paper poll books, when I started as an officer, had the social security numbers in them. So that might be something to check on so that we can check when we're doing in-person voting. I've wondered about that. I think that's something we need to bone up on, make sure that's being done. But when we have people vote by mail, we have in our system, if we have one of these anomalies, it's not like we're going to say, well, it sucks to be Sally. She's in Paris, so she doesn't get to vote. We'll know Sally doesn't have a social. And we talk to people, because we're very much a part of this process. I mean, at least in most places, we're not like, on a vacation. We'll go in and say, hey, Kat, Sally doesn't have a social. We'll put a Post-it note. I mean, we unstock and Post-it by now. We put a Post-it note and say, they didn't do this right, they did, this is the problem, we're waiting to hear from them. And so, it's not like, ships passing in the night. There's a process here. So, just so anyone is concerned, who is hearing, how do we have people, are we not paying attention? That's not the case at all. It's just there's some people, as you've heard rare, who do not have socials, and we still have to register them because that's the way it is.
And your point is it's extremely rare. It's unique circumstances, and Additionally, I see you, Terry. I'm so sorry.
Sorry, jump.
But additionally, what I get from this, Walt, is that you're emphasizing the fact that we already have this information from people. They provide it to us throughout the process multiple times. They register, they re-register, they ask for a ballot. We get their social security number and their birth date over and over again. Voters reaffirm this very often sometimes because they re-register through the DMV or whatever.
Well, they can do it again.
Yeah, Terry, you have your hand up.
I would just suggest that if whatever changes that you are going to, or recommendations that Chris is going to make, please, for the love of Pete, put something in there that is an education blitz to voters. We had our instructions changed 15 times during presidential. I exaggerate, but it felt like it. But it was 14, I'm sorry. But we really do need to educate the population when it comes to absentee voting. The reason for that, number one, college students are notorious for putting their dorm number or their dorm address on a witness statement. You did it, didn't you?
No, I can say I voted in college from a different state, and I did not make that mistake.
Okay.
So.
But I would like to see something in there about educating the voters, whether you give us money to do it or the state can do it.
Okay, thank you. That's a good point. Any other comments on Javon's? Javon, do you have anything you'd like to share or say?
I just want to say thank you. This has been a great discussion, and thank you for your input. I've taken some notes, and we'll definitely keep that in mind as we work through the next couple steps of the process. But thank you all for the input.
So I do want to leave some time for public comment. We do have some folks from the public here, which we will allow 3 minutes, similar to what we do with the state board. But before we move on to that, which will start around 2:30, I just want to open it back up to the CAP. It seemed like we had a robust discussion there. If there were any follow-up on the CAP discussion till about 2:30, so we give folks a chance who have come in to join us from the general public to have their say before we wrap up today.
Yeah, Max, I want to reattack on the CAP thing. I think it's important that whatever recommendation you guys make, it needs to be something that can be easily delivered. So yours is a little tougher, JD's is a little bit easier, by far. So let's make yours easier and make it easier for the registrars and the electoral boards. And that's look at the end in mind, and then work backwards to how do we implement the kind of thing. So we know what the end desire is, and that's that parties and candidates want to be able to data mine precinct level activity to help them plan future events. Got it. That's easy to do. Let's not make it too hard by demanding that it happen before midnight on election night, because there is nothing more infuriating than when a candidate sees numbers posted and then 90 minutes later they changed because there was a typo in a large precinct in a large county on a big event, right? And that is going to multiply exponentially. It is, because now you're talking about literally double the number of precincts reporting in every election, because I've got my precinct 202 reporting from the precinct, and then I'm going to add precinct 202's vote by mail numbers. So I'm really reporting 202 numbers twice. They get kludged together. You know, eventually we declare a candidate and all that kind of stuff. So,
wouldn't it be 3?
Well,
vote by mail, and then
well, but you're still doing it as CAP. But
No, if you report it separately,
I understand, and you may even have, I always report the hand count separately, just because I think you should,
Oh,
right?
Greg,
So,
all changed.
let's not,
We got 2
yeah,
caps now.
let's not, well, they just told you that we're making it harder. We just are. So, let's not require it election night, because that's a bridge too far. It just is. The way you should do this, and I actually mean this, because I think it's doable. I know there's a technological solution to it. That stuff's going to cost money, so this will incur a bill. These guys always hate it when the staff recommendation to the General Assembly, when they're doing the fiscal impacts, is when you guys use the word negligible or whatever. It's not. It won't be. This is going to be expensive. I still think it's worth doing, and there's going to be some things that you guys can do. So I think your recommendation ought to be, Max, that we do this in Virginia because it has utility. We can argue, the value added of it, but it's got some utility. It really does. The parties and the candidates want it. It's something that we can provide. It has a cost that we may or may not need to discuss with the public, but it is going to be more expensive to report this data. But let's make it in a way that the electoral boards and the general registrars can handle it. And I think what you do is add an addendum to the abstracts of the vote that are now due 10, 12 days, and I'm just making this up, after the election, because we've moved some deadlines for the vote by mail and some of those other kind of things. The real numbers aren't done for quite some time, but the real numbers are what's important, right? So we're going to report CAP
on election night
as a precinct, not as a shred, and we're going to report our other precincts as precincts so that we can declare a winner. It's still not official till the electoral boards have done their thing, right? And because the data mining of that stuff wants to be done later, and we want it to be accurate, make it a reporting requirement inside of the abstract process. So from my locality, I send the state, here's the race, here's who won, and the addendum to that is, here's the vote by precincts, including here's the vote by CAP, vote by mail, vote early by precinct, and you've got all of that stuff. It can also be sent in electronically for the localities that have the ability to do that, but not every locality is going to have that information, but they can certainly have it by the time that the abstracts are due.
Can I just real quick, very quickly, for the GRs generally in the room, and I don't actually even need an answer right now, just something that, like, does everyone agree on, like, that kind of deadline for when this could get done? What seems like a reasonable amount of time to do this?
There's a problem being, okay, my preference, and I'm happy to say my preference is if we're guaranteed that it has to change. So preface it by saying, if I'm guaranteeing it has to change, right? Because the general assembly's changed nothing. But if I know that I'm guaranteed it has to change, what is easiest for, I think, all of us to know to administer is that basically election night reporting stays the same as it has been, and then we have some time after the election to produce this granular information. So if I know it has to change, then that might be my preference. But the problem is that data is on sticks. It's on data sticks, right? It's on thumb drives. And those thumb drives are the custody of the clerk. And then there's differences with the voting equipment vendors about what your availability is, because ES&S equipment has the ability to have redundant drives, so that we could have a stick that belongs to the clerk and then maybe we have a stick that belongs to us. But I'm not sure that the other vendors have that. My understanding is the other vendors do not, that there's not redundant drives. So then when do I get the data back, right? So it's the custody of the clerk waiting contests and recounts. So I can get those sticks back after contests and recounts, and then I can produce this granular data. So it's not, so the deadline needs to be 45 days, 60 days out.
And it would be based on,
based on recounts in the contest.
I don't have it memorized, but I know that whatever the clerk of county, yes. Okay, that's good, that makes sense.
Yes.
I would just say,
that's my preference.
I would just say that I think we've talked about the sticks and stuff, but I mean, what's not been said, I don't think, is the software to get that, at least for ES&S, is like.
It was in there.
Yeah.
The software, the cost, I know, but let me give the number. The number is like $20,000 to $50,000 a year.
The software license agreement, Walt told me, was $50,000 a year per county.
So it's like paying, so we can pay $50,000 a year so that we can go get our sticks and load them up. Or we can just buy some paper and run it through the machine. Now, my preference would be to just do the paper. I don't know what that means if we end up having like, 2 mile, like the CVS tape meetings you see on Facebook, stand by. So we may be competitive, but, and it may take a while for them to come out.
So your preference is election night, the tapes, broken down by precinct?
No, it doesn't. You could still have a total. You could still have a total, but then you have it broken down. I'm sure it can be programmed to get, I don't know, maybe it can't, but to give you a total.
Yes.
And then you have it that night, because the alternative is to spend $50,000 a year just to go stick 13 sticks in the machine or
Yes,
whatever.
but you still have the tape to the SOR that is for public inspection in your office.
Yes.
Yes.
So you can still get the information. It might
Yes.
take you 45 days.
And Max, we didn't ask
That's
that.
what he's saying.
Yeah, I don't know.
Produce multiple types of results.
Yeah, that's the issue. Is the assumption that you're making is something that I haven't personally verified. So I don't know if you could do that, because if not, you would get. You'd have to pick. I don't know if you have to pick and choose, and so that's something that
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't have the quote. I mean, Greg gives it, and I know that I've looked at it and been like, well, you know,
Yeah.
someone's going on a big vacation, and it's not me.
Yeah.
But that's expensive hard software.
Max, we're having an election in November, so if you want to come to Hanover and experience
actually,
it,
yeah, that'd
yeah,
be good.
come on.
It'd be a good learning experience for me.
Yeah.
So let's just take a couple more, I want to make sure the folks from the public have a chance to comment. So after you two, let's transition into that.
I'm just quick. I
Yeah, of
just
course.
would have a recommendation for the report for this one in particular. I think that there is a level of risk of human error in some of these options, and I think that that needs to be in some way mentioned on a scale, or what that level of risk is for that option.
Yeah, that is in the updated report that I neglected to mention. But yeah, that's something that will be considered. Yes. Yeah, Jeff.
I just wanted to bring up that it's too bad that Susan Cobb isn't here. She's a electoral board member from Chesapeake, because Chesapeake has actually done this, and it would be very helpful if she were here to explain how it was done. They have hard equipment, I believe, and they just reported on election night the cap as a you know, an aggregate, the way we all do, because that's the way we count them now. But then some days later, they had a request for the data by precinct. And because it was all stored, the individual thumb drives were downloaded into a central computer that's part of the HART system. Now, it's different, I guess, for other
It's the same for
vendors.
USNS, that's the same.
Yeah, and so HART provided them a small software tweak to allow them to print out that data. But the way they did it, they had 63 precincts, and they had 63 different absentee ballot styles.
Right.
And the one thing I've never gotten, I've spoken to the registrar a couple of times, I can't remember her name, and I've also spoken to Susan Cobb a number of times, but I've neglected to ask why they did it, because they didn't get the request for the data until some days after the election.
I can tell, I don't know the 100% answer, but I know when we were looking at hard equipment, one of the things we were told is our ballots are programmed by precinct.
Right.
That is our way of doing business. And that was one of the things that I was like, well, doesn't that sound fun to administer? Every election, you have one ballot per precinct.
Yeah.
So all the issues we're now discussing statewide.
Well, we had this argument with precinct. Their definition of precinct is different from ours. What we call a precinct, they call a polling location. So precinct to them is different. I know we got in all kinds of trouble with this.
Oh, well, that's what they told us.
Yeah, when they say precinct, they don't mean precinct the way we do.
Okay.
It's a polling location for South precinct.
Susan is actually a member of the group. She just couldn't make it today. So,
Yeah.
But that being said, we're going to open it up to the members of the public. So if you are here to observe, that's great. But if you have a comment to make, please raise your hand at this time, and we'll just sort of go through systematically. And if there's time left at the end, we can, of course, continue the conversation if you would like, or if you would like to wrap early, we can certainly do that as well. But, so just to make sure, we have two. So I saw, sorry, I forget your name, but I saw you first, but we'll have you go.
Sure.
I prepared this, and I'm happy to send it to you, Rachel, by email if anybody's interested in this. But it's regarding the witness signature on absentee ballots. I'm sorry, I'm Deb Wake. I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of Virginia. The League supports eliminating the requirement that voters who vote by mail must find a witness to sign their ballot envelopes. Eliminating the witness signature requirement for absentee voting will increase participation, increase efficiency, and streamline voting by doing away with a hurdle that is not serving its purpose. The league has long been engaged in this issue, specifically in a federal court lawsuit the league filed last year. The University of Virginia academic testified that the witness requirement makes it more difficult and burdensome to vote by mail, especially for citizens who live alone, including the elderly, minorities, those with disabilities, those who live in rural communities, and low-income voters. We believe that voters should be required to verify their identify as a qualified voter in the same way, and be subject to the same penalties whether voting in person or voting by mail. Fortunately, current Virginia law already satisfies this test without the witness requirement. Virginia law requires as an in-person voter without another qualified ID to sign a confirmation of identity form subject to penalties if falsified. Similarly, a voter who votes by mail currently must sign a comparable statement on their envelope, also under penalty of law. Both types of voters are already subject to strict penalties that already discourage falsifying identity and making the witness requirement for mail-in voters superfluous. Not all voters can readily leave home to find a witness. Almost 33% of Virginians over 65 live alone. 23.6% of Virginians have a disability. 12.1% have serious mobility issues, and 4.1% are blind or have serious vision impairment. African American Virginians are more likely to live alone, have a disability, or lack transportation. As our lawsuit last year showed, the witness requirements serve a purpose. The ACLU stated witness signatures are of no use to election officials, since such signatures are not verified and can be illegible. In a report released earlier this month, the Bipartisan Policy Center stated that witness requirements have not been proven to increase security and are especially challenging for lower income voters and voters with disabilities who may not have the time, resources, or ability to obtain a witness. While some may argue that there is a greater opportunity for fraud by mail voting, there is little or no evidence in practice because fraud is so vanishingly rare. To the extent a voter could be subject to pressure, such as in a nursing home setting, requiring a witness would not solve that, since the witness is likely to be the person exerting the pressure. The prospect of voter impersonation is minimized by the many checkpoints already in the system in Virginia, as members of the work group know better than anyone. An eligible voter must provide identification to receive a ballot, which is mailed to the voter's address and is subject to ballot tracking. Absentee ballot fraud is rare. The Brennan Center for Justice has stated it is more likely for an American to be struck by lightning than to commit fraud. Witness signatures are not required in 39 states, and these include and no signature matching, including Connecticut, Delaware, Maryland, New Mexico, Vermont, Wisconsin, and Wyoming. Voters generally sign an oath under penalty of perjury, and Virginia does not need a witness signature, and I've got sources on that. So, thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. If you would like to send that to me, I can give you my email address, and I can distribute that to the group as well. And then Angela, right?
Yes, Angela Boyer. Simple request. I would love to have a copy of these slides that were presented. Sure. Some folks have stuff. I walked in kind of late, so I got stuck trying to grab a bite. So whatever the handouts are, I would like to have. Do you have any extras with you?
I don't print it, no, but I can email them to you.
Okay.
That works.
You'll email the slides and things like that.
Sure. Definitely. So, moving forward, we've collected some really great feedback. Thank you for that. We're going to go back to the memos. You have all of our contact information, or most of you should, and if not, just stop by with me and I can update you on that. And you can provide written feedback if you didn't get a chance to say, or maybe you feel more comfortable just emailing your comments and saying them out loud. Please feel free to do that. We're going to go back and we're going to work, Danny and I, both with Javon and Max. Unfortunately, they'll be leaving us in about a week and a half. So they've done great work for the department and sort of taking these reports across the finish line. So you may hear some, individual feedback. It is likely we probably will not meet again as a group, but we will for sure send out the report for final feedback to the work group members before we pass it to the commissioner to flag any red flags, or tell us you've gotten everything wrong, you're fired, or I don't know. So we really appreciate the time that you have taken to give us feedback and to come to Richmond today. I realized at the beginning I was, trying to coordinate everything. I didn't get a chance for the work group itself to introduce itself to one another. So if you are a member of the work group, please tell us your name and maybe where you're from. Jim, would you like to start?
Jim Nix, Secretary of the Charlottesville Electoral Board.
Diana Dutton, Deputy Registrar of Volunteer.
Roger Amoy, Secretary, Accomack County Board.
Frankly, I'm Representative of the Democratic Party of Virginia, and I agree with Rick's last comments, by the way.
Heard it here, folks.
Walt Latham, York County Registrar.
Eric Smithson, Director of Elections and General Registrar, Hanover County.
Brenda Correa, Director of Elections, General Registrar for the City of Fairfax.
I'm Allison Robbins. I'm the Director of Elections and General Registrar for the County of Wise, and I'm also President of the Voter Registrars Association of Virginia.
Jackie Britt, I'm the Director of Elections and General Registrar for Nelson County.
Angie Miglia-Turner, City of Alexandria, General Registrar and Director of Elections.
Hi, I'm Janet Riddick, and I'm here representing the Republican Party of Virginia.
I'm Greg Rittenholzer, former registrar at Stafford County and former chairman of the Election Assistance Commission Standards Board, here representing RPV.
I think that's it for the folks that are here today. Any additional comments, questions?
I have something. I was going to say that if you ever want to get together again, got a great spot Hanover for you. Great lunch at the tavern, so just keep that in mind.
I really like Barry's Produce.
Exactly.
I always stop there. I mean, come on out there.
Yeah, I just have a question about next steps then. So there'll be a report finalized by these guys, we get comments, and that'll be the end of the report. Those are reports to the commissioner, but then the commissioner is not going to send those to the General Assembly. He's going to send elects comments, or it's not clear to me how that's all going to
Yeah, so the report itself goes to the General Assembly and will go in October. But, we're not sending it, as staffers. It's just the chain of command. So sorry to that, it'll go, once we're finished it will go to Chris. Chris will review what we've come up with, then it'll go to the secretary, and then it'll go to the GA. So it's just a chain of command.
And so once it goes to the commissioner at that point, it still may be subject to change.
Yeah, if he hates what we wrote, or, come up with, we are at the will, his will.
Also, obviously, our emails are up there. Please shoot us an email if you have any thoughts or anything you'd like to follow up with after this presentation. It's been fantastic, and it was a great experience.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming down and all your feedback. We really appreciate it.
All right, Max, are you going to send out a list of to-dos for us?
Absolutely.
Yeah, maybe following up with some informal